Good afternoon. The Prime Minister will be holding a press briefing later this afternoon as the government is considering a new stay-at-home order across England. Schools, colleges and universities could be exempt. It comes as documents seen by the BBC suggest the UK is on course for a daily coronavirus death toll of more than 4,000 unless further restrictions are introduced, much higher than during the first wave. This morning, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon advised people there not to travel to and from England unless essential. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
Stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives.
The stark message from spring and the stark reality, a similar instruction for England, appears imminent again. This is why the lines here are the projections of different groups of scientists of what might happen if there aren't any further restrictions. The steadily climbing low black line is what was the so-called reasonable worst-case scenario. But all of the projections now suggest things could be much, much worse than that. And compare them with the blue shaded curve on the left of this graph. That is what happened earlier this year.
We've been saying, and we've been saying it for about 3 or 4 weeks, that it's really important the government moves quickly and does tough lockdowns as quickly as possible, because otherwise the NHS won't have the capacity it needs.
It's thought schools, colleges and universities will stay open during what could be a month-long lockdown for England. The Cabinet is discussing the plans this afternoon. The Prime Minister will hold a news conference at 4 o'clock.
Because action wasn't taken earlier when it should have been, we're now in a harder place, and the tier 3 approach essentially just levels us off at a bad place, and the rest of the country is coming up to that bad place. And it's the recognition of that scenario which is now leading, I think, to what's been discussed today.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon urged people to comply with Scotland's current restrictions and said people shouldn't travel to or from England unless it's essential. Wales is already a week into a lockdown. Northern Ireland schools will reopen as planned on Monday, and current restrictions will end a week on Friday as planned. In recent weeks in England, the government's focus has been on a regional response to the virus. That, it seems, is about to radically change. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Well, I'm joined now by our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Laura, the Prime Minister's been desperate to avoid another national lockdown, but is it now inevitable?
It seems extremely likely, and perhaps as early as this afternoon, Gita. I mean, he described it as a misery. It's been plain something that Downing Street wanted to avoid at almost any cost. So why the change of heart? Because it is an enormous about turn from Downing Street. Well, the simple answer is that the projections of what might happen with the disease are far worse than the government had expected until very recently, way beyond what's been described as the reasonable worst-case scenario. So there is a suggestion that despite political resistance, despite political reluctance inside government, that the government feels right now they have really little choice but to act. But of course, they leave themselves wide open to accusations of, I told you so. This was a recommendation put forward by many of their own advisers more than 6 weeks ago. And also, there is an added complexity this time round because the other parts of the UK may not follow seamlessly behind this stay-at-home order that we expect, which will be likely given to England in the next few hours. But there are a couple of really important differences. This is not exactly the same as what the government announced in March. We do expect schools, universities, colleges to be able to stay open. We expect that this will be lasting for a month. It won't be open-ended as it was first time round. And the other thing to say is that what the government wants to do is throw every effort at a programme of mass testing to be dramatically accelerated in the next few weeks to try to find a way out of this situation. But there's no question for Boris Johnson, this is another very serious moment and one that he wanted to avoid, but those hopes have failed.
Laura Kuenssberg, thanks very much indeed. Well, the prospect of a new national lockdown comes on the final day of the Treasury's furlough scheme, which has subsidised the wages of up to 9.5 million employees. The less generous job support scheme replaces it, and business leaders are warning that much more financial help will be needed from the government in the months ahead. Our business correspondent Katie Austin reports.
Today was a big date in businesses' diaries because the furlough scheme is closing. This lighting firm will use its replacement, the Job Support Scheme. Aimed at keeping workers in their jobs on reduced hours, it's less generous. The government will pay 62% of hours they're not working and the employer 5%.
We used to have 85 staff working in the two warehouses. We think we've only got enough work for about 25, but JSS means that we can actually keep 45 staff on working part-time, which means that we've got those 45 skilled staff when the work comes back in the new year.
There's a different version for firms forced to close by law because of restrictions. For them, the government will fund 2/3 of workers' wages. But overnight, the landscape has changed.
My heart sunk because it's devastating news for business.
The boss of one hotel group told me a further support package would be needed if there's a further England-wide lockdown.
The grants need to be reviewed. The furlough scheme really needs to be back to where it was in March, where we're covering 80% of our staff's wages. We really need those VAT and business rate relief extended for hospitality to come out of this crisis and recover over the number of years it's going to take to repay all the debt.
It's unsettling news too for this London beauty salon.
We had just started to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the fact that we may have to lock down and close for however long is a real concern to us. You know, we still have to pay rent. I wasn't given a rent period, a holiday period for rent.
If a second national lockdown does happen, the big questions now are whether the Chancellor will have to announce another round of financial support and how that would be paid for. Katie Austin, BBC News.
So, as we've been hearing, there have been growing calls for a circuit break. What has led the government to reassess its current restrictions for England? Our health correspondent, Catherine de Costa, is here. How exactly have we got here?
Well, you may remember late in September, the government advisors on SAGE recommended a short 2-week circuit break to slow the spread of the virus and buy time to strengthen the test and trace system. Instead, the government opted for the tiered regional approach in England. But even with the toughest level 3 restrictions, they haven't been enough to stop new infections and to bring cases down quickly enough. And the latest data suggests that the epidemic is still growing across the UK. The R number, that's the amount of people that an infected person passes the virus onto, that's above 1. So it's still growing, and it's estimated that there are more than 50,000 new cases in England every day. Senior health officials say that hospital admissions and deaths are now baked into the system, and they'll continue to rise. Experts had warned that a second wave could be worse than the first, and that the longer you leave it, the harder it is to turn things around. Professor John Edmonds, who sits on SAGE, has said that now a 2-week circuit break wouldn't be enough, and that we'll have to lock down harder and longer to bring cases down to an acceptable level. He also thinks, though, that a national lockdown would help all areas in England, given the new warnings that hospitals in the northwest and the southwest are now among the first that could run out of beds within weeks.
Catherine de Costa, many thanks. Well, up to now, the government has been committed to its 3-tier system. Bradford is due to go into Tier 3 on Monday. Our correspondent Lakshmi Gopal is there. Lakshmi.
Geeta, well, this part of the country is already very used to being under tighter lockdown restrictions. In fact, today it's exactly 3 months since parts of West Yorkshire, including here in Bradford, were put into local lockdown. And Bradford has and continues to struggle with its coronavirus infection rate. In fact, latest figures, which are from just a few days ago, show that it's in the top 20 in England, with around 490 cases per 100,000 people. And other parts of West Yorkshire is a different picture. For example, in Leeds it has gone down slightly, and in Kirklees and Calderdale it's not as high, but it is rising. And the whole region, with its 2.3 million people, is being moved into Tier 3 on Monday. And that means, although gyms can stay open, casinos, betting shops, soft play centres will have to close, along with pubs and bars that don't serve substantial meals. And some businesses I've spoken to say they have been hanging by a thread after previous restrictions and the 10 p.m. curfew, and some fear that actually this move to Tier 3 could be the final nail in the coffin. Now, the region is getting just over £59 million of funding from the government, but many fear that with all that the area has gone through in recent months, that simply won't go far enough.
Lakshmi Gopal in Bradford, thank you. Let's have a reminder of what restrictions are in place in the other nations. Scotland's First Minister has urged people not to twist the new coronavirus regulations when they come into force on Monday. Edinburgh, Glasgow, Stirling and Falkirk will be joined by Dundee and Ayrshire in level 3 of a new 5-tier system from Monday. Cafes, pubs and restaurants are only allowed to open until 6 and alcohol sales are banned. In Wales, the 17-day firebreak lockdown, with people only able to leave their homes for limited reasons, continues. It's currently set to finish on November the 9th. Northern Ireland First Minister Arlene Foster has said that the current tightened restrictions there will end as planned on the 13th of November. Pubs and restaurants have been closed and schools, which will reopen on Monday, were closed for 2 weeks. You can keep up to date with all the very latest developments about the coronavirus outbreak on the BBC News app and on our website. Now, within the last hour, it's been announced that Sir Sean Connery has died aged 90. The first actor to play 007 in the James Bond films, it was a role that brought him global stardom, and it was followed by decades as one of Hollywood's leading actors. Our entertainment correspondent David Silito looks back at his life.
Bond. James Bond.
Sean Connery, a star whose life and career was defined by one word: Bond.
Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking.
As the suave but ruthless 007, he spent the 60s saving the world and dealing with power-crazed evil geniuses. But the sudden success
Do you expect me to talk?
caught him by surprise.
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
I had no awareness of that scale of kind of reverence and pressure and what have you.
His family today confirmed that he had died aged 90 at his home in Nassau, the end of a long and successful career. There was much more to him than just Bond, an Oscar for his role in The Untouchables.
He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue.
But 007 always cast a shadow. Sean Connery had set the benchmark against which all others would be judged.
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
Sir Sean Connery, who has died aged 90. You can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel. Bye for now.